What's that? I just hit 15,000 subscribers. Well, I kind of promised to do this after about 10,000, so I might as well celebrate this milestone by losing all of them, shall we? But first, I have a very important story to tell you all. So back when I was in college for video game development, before I switched my major over to 3D animation, Prime came out. And for years after that, whenever someone would ask me, how do I get into Transformers? What are the best shows to watch? I would always tell them there's 3. Watch G1 if you're here for a good old time with 80s cheese, watch Beast Wars if you want the best writing the show has ever had, and watch Prime for the best mixture of animation and writing that the series has ever had. So back at that time, I was in my first video game development class, I think, and the particular guy who asked me was a guy I was pretty friendly with. I sadly don't remember his name anymore at all, but he had a very distinct way of speaking because he had a bad speech impediment growing up and he had a lot of speech therapy. So he spoke every single word completely distinctly from every other word that I have a very difficult way of replicating. I don't sound quite like he sounded. But this guy asked me, he was like, how do I get into it? And I was like, oh, well, you can watch Beast Wars and you can watch G1 and then you can watch Prime, which is the most recent. He's like, oh, Prime's recent? Like, how recent? I was like, oh, it came out like 2012. And he's like, so is it like over or is it like still running? And I was like, you know what? I don't know, because it came to like a hiatus or a break. It just started doing reruns and I kind of fell out. Like I just kind of forgot to keep watching. There was nothing new on, so I didn't want to watch the reruns, so I just didn't watch it. And then I'm sure the show picked up again by now, but I don't know how far along it's gotten. And he's like, okay, cool. So I go home and I start watching Prime again. And it wasn't like that much further ahead or I was catching reruns or something. But I then completely forgot about that conversation. I just didn't remember that conversation happened. A couple years go by and I'm in a chat room. And someone is talking to me about Transformers and that they've never been a fan. And they want to know, like, how do they get into it? I was like, oh, well, you can watch Beast Wars for the best writing that the series has ever had. You can watch G1 for a good slice of old 80s cheese. And you can watch Prime for the best mixture of animation and writing that the series has ever had. And he was like, oh, okay, like, so Prime, the most recent one, is that over yet? And I was like, you know what? I don't know. I think I got to like the end of the first season, and there was the break between seasons, and I just didn't know when the second season was going to start. So I guess I just kind of missed the second season, and I don't know when it picked back up. And he was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. Thanks for the recommendations. So I was done with that conversation, and I just, Prime wasn't on TV anymore, I don't think, so I just started watching it on a piracy website, and I completely forgot that conversation ever happened. A couple of years later, still, I have now finally switched my major over to 3D animation. And I'm not in a 3D animation class, but this is the worst semester of my entire life. I was showing up to school at 6 a.m. and I was getting in my car to go home at 11 p.m. It was an absolutely hellish schedule. And I had this 4-hour break, like a solid 4 hours between classes, and I did not have any money at the time. So I couldn't afford to drive home and spend those 4 hours away, so I just spent those 4 hours in class. And one day, there's a girl that normally kind of shows up early and I hang out with her before the class starts. But one day, her girlfriend shows up with a friend of hers. And I start having like a conversation with her, and the girl in question never shows up. It turns out later that the girl in question, my friend, had broken up with this girl because this girl was abusive and now she was stalking her. So that was a great thing to find out. I have an amazing story about that chick that comes even later than that, but that's irrelevant to this plot. But I'm talking to the stalker, and I don't realize she's a stalker at this point. And she's like, "Oh, hey, I've always like wondered like how do I get into Transformers? Like, where's a good place to start?" The same thing. It's like, "Oh, hey, Transformers G1 is amazing if you like 80s cheese. Transformers Beast Wars is my favorite of all time. And then you got Prime for amazing animation and storytelling." And she goes, "Oh, okay, so is that show over or is it still running?" And I go, like, you know what, I don't know. I was watching it online, but I guess I just got really busy with college and I kind of forgot to keep watching it. I'm sure it's like, it's got to be over by now. And we're like, okay, cool, whatever, and we like said goodbye. So a couple of years still pass. It's like 2017, maybe 2018, and I'm hanging out with a good friend of mine, and he doesn't want to get into Transformers, and he thinks that Beast Wars looks like it's really stupid. And I'm like, nah, dude, you gotta trust me. We'll watch it together. And he was like, fine, whatever. And we watched it together. And he gets to the end of Beast Wars, and he was like, oh my god, that was so good. And I've like fully brought him into the Transformers fandom now. He is like super stoked to be a Transformers fan, like a newly minted Transformers fan. And he's like, that was so good. That was so like awesome. I loved every single second of it. What else is next? Like what can we watch? Because like, I just need more. I need more Transformers. And I was like, that's kind of, I kind of brought you in at the series high. You're not going to find anything, quite that good again. And he was like, oh, what about G1? And I was like, well, G1's great if you like, 80s cheese. It's just not going to be as good as Beast Wars. And he's like, what about Prime? And I was like, oh yeah, no, Prime's really good. Prime has a really great combination of animation and writing. And he was like, how is the ending? Because for me, the ending is paramount. The ending, if the ending of the show is really good, then I'll love it forever. But if the ending of the show is bad, then I'll hate it. And I was like, well, you know what? I don't know how the ending is. I've never seen the ending. He's like, well, why did the show get bad at some point? And I was like, yeah, I don't remember it getting bad. I just, I was watching it and then, something happened and I guess I just forgot to keep watching it. I've thought that before. I've thought that several times before. Oh, that's a bad sign! At which point, I finally sat down and watched all of Prime. And you know what? I know why it was a bad sign. Because this show is so fucking boring! Oh my god! It is so punishingly dull. But first, your likes! Please give. And if you enjoy this video by the end and you aren't subscribed already, please consider it. Anyways, yes, this show is catastrophically, mind-numbingly bland. And when it's not being the most boring fucking thing I've ever persevered through on sheer determination alone, it is shockingly enraging. Again, I want to point out that this is a show that, like many of you, for years I considered to be one of the greats. Trying to sit through this on a binge, however, showed me that even I can fall victim to flashy presentation on occasion, because watching this all the way through the first time took years off my life. But let's explain how this show got to be so violently monotonous. And it starts with the characters. The problem with Prime is that 90% of the characters are operating on about 40% of the emotional scale. One of the ways I always try to explain this to people is by challenging them to find a character who has a genuine laugh in the show. Not someone who is laughing evilly, not someone who is laughing condescendingly, not someone who is laughing confidently, someone who just found something funny and belted out laughing. And I can't think of who better to start this off with than the titular Prime of Prime. A dude so fucking dull, I actually significantly prefer the movie version of this guy. That douche may be a violent, cruel psychopath, but at least he's not a completely emotionless robot. Primes were forged without a sense of humor. Tell that to the character who once got a good chuckle out of a booby trap that traps boobies. It's not even that great a play on words. That's just how much that dude liked to laugh. Optimus Prime is supposed to have a great sense of humor. But once again, we have shown that Optimus is the single greatest victim of the 1986 movie, because while I love that movie, it is overly revered by the community, and it has overwritten what was once a great character. In that movie, Optimus Prime dies immediately in the middle of an active war zone after kicking a bunch of ass and dropping a few in-the-moment-appropriate platitudes. And even though that was never his characterization, just a result of him behaving as that particular situation demanded, everyone who saw that movie just had it wipe their memory of the guy who came before. Who was Optimus Prime? The father of a generation. Warm, caring, funny, inquisitive, friendly, inviting, principled, gentle, with a great love for new experiences and new ideas. Who is he now? Stoic? Serious? Cold? Unfunny? Talks too much, saying too little? A powerful combatant? And in Prime, they turned that up to 11. I don't even call this dude Optimus. This is Platitudes Dispenser 9000, a completely emotionless robot who's only good for punching things and puking out proverbs. I have spoken to tons, and I mean this, tons of more recently minted Transformers fans who absolutely despise Optimus Prime, because they only know him through his depiction in this show. My friend, who I introduced to the fandom through Beast Wars that I talked about at the start, he's one of them. He loathes Optimus, to the point where he's always super happy when Optimus dies because it gets him out of the series for a decent while. And that's all because this was his introduction to the character, and he's just such a horrific charisma vacuum here. The dude has the personality of a styrofoam block, and you can see with a lot of the recent depictions of Optimus in comics and shows just how far that interpretation pervades. In modern shows, Optimus is not just boring, he's openly mocked for being boring and out of touch in the actual content of the series by his own troops. Not just fans who are sick of this shit, but an actual story canon. It is pretty much just accepted fact that if you know Optimus in this fandom, you know that he's lame and annoying, which the man whose death scarred a generation should not be. Siege may be character assassination, but this one is the most boring, the most lifeless. The one that justified Siege in trying to make you hate him because you were already expected to. Now, Optimus was by far the most boring character in the show, but that's not to say that the rest of them weren't gunning for that fucking title. Bulkhead has nothing going on. He is a version of the character who had every interesting aspect stripped out of him. Gone is the simple country bumpkin who learned everything there is to know about space bridges, replaced with a guy who was a wrecker, kind of has a habit of breaking things. He's one of the few characters who ever laughs, but it's always at a 5 out of 10 on the emotional scale. He's not dying, it's just guy chuckles. Everyone in this show has the energy of your grandparents. Arcee is just frigid, she's cold and distant and so dark and broody. But like all the characters, her emotions are so deadened. When she screams Tailgate's name as he gets his throat slit, it's at best like a 6 out of 10. You just watched your partner die, but I've seen people scream with more emotion in their voice when someone got out of the car and forgot to engage the parking brake, so it rolled into a lamppost. Ratchet I want to love because he's played by Jeffrey Combs, but like everyone, he's just so flat. He's got a little more than most of his team by virtue of being curmudgeonly, but even when he explodes in anger, it's always at a simmer. I'm getting bored just describing these characters because they all have the same problem. They're all too serious all the time, and none of them are any fun. And you'd think that the Decepticons would fare better, but Soundwave is literally not a character, and it actually pisses me off when I hear people talking about how scary he is. The dude is just a metal shipping container placed in the corner of every scene he's in that people act like is super menacing, but it's just a lifeless object. He's a prop, not a person, standing stiffly, never speaking, never gesturing, never doing anything. Characters just look at him and put their own interpretations on him because there's literally nothing actually there. And the whole actions speak louder than words thing is the stupidest, cringiest thing. It makes literally no sense, especially for a soldier, who may have to shout things like, "Enemies on the right!" or something. Because if you don't do shit like that, then congrats, you just got a bunch of your team killed, also that way you could prove to no one who's impressed what a big man you are by not talking. I guarantee you, Megatron and Starscream do not give a shit that Soundwave doesn't talk. And why does he even need to prove this? Someone who's capable doesn't have anything to prove. Then there's Breakdown, and I can't really describe Breakdown. He's kind of angry. That's about it. And somehow, he's one of the characters in the show who had the most potential. Because at a point, he comes to owe the Autobots and Starscream personally a serious debt. And they were playing at, who is he going to remain loyal to? He's having second thoughts. Maybe the Autobots don't have to be his enemy. And then like one fucking episode later, he fucking dies off fucking screen, with none of that ever being raised again. Then there's Starscream, who's just baffling, but manages to be at least a little fun. He's conniving, he's vampy, he's very heavily queer-coded, but he also manages to go on a completely insane character progression where he doesn't so much grow as actually become less interesting. And he's honestly really irritating with the way that he constantly brags that he killed an Autobot with Cliffjumper, which just makes you realize that somehow in millions of years of war, he'd never managed to do that before. Because you wouldn't phrase it like, "I killed an Autobot," and you wouldn't bang on and on about it if you had ever done any more than that one. It's like he thinks that no one else has ever killed an Autobot before because he never had. Then there's Knockout, the only enjoyable character in the show. The only enjoyable character in the show. Who is the only character who is clearly just loving their life. He's having a good time, and it's infectious. And maybe that's only because literally everyone around him is the apotheosis of the concept of the color gray. But he stands out as a bright spot in this snore of a show. And then you get to Megatron. And this show was not content with just having the worst Optimus. It must also have the worst Megatron. Everyone's always on about how terrifying this version of Megs is. How threatening. No, he's not. You just think he is because he has sharp teeth, a raspy voice, and he looks scary. But I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm sorry, but I'm not intimidated by incompetence. This dude is an infuriating moron. His plans constantly fail, not because the Autobots are so capable, but because he is too dumb to live, constantly sabotaging himself and his faction out of pure ego and vanity. He is, in fact, the Autobots' single greatest asset. If he just stayed in a coma, then every time his faction had the upper hand, he wouldn't have been available to cut their own legs out from under them so he could have the pleasure of being the one to kill Optimus himself, which is the stupidest, cringiest bullshit in the universe. Any character who uses that phrase instantaneously loses all of my respect and gains all of my hatred. I don't know how I'm supposed to be afraid of a dude who is his own downfall at every turn. He is the reason he fails, and I don't fear pathetic losers. And then there's the humans, and don't even get me started on them. I can sum up Jack's entire character by just going, I'm a teenager. Raph the Wunderkid is such a tired trope that they don't do anything with, outside the fact that he can somehow understand Bumblebee because his family is a racist stereotype, so he's used to trying to listen through a crowd. I'm sorry, but how the fuck does that mean that he can speak alien binary? You may have noticed that I've not mentioned Bumblebee yet, and that's because he's not a character, as they've stuck with a movie characterization that can't speak. They do this because humans inherently view things that can't speak as more baby-like or animal-like, so are therefore more innocent and more easily bonded with. It's also why they gave him the big eyes and the exaggerated body language, so you can physically see when he's happy or angry by his posture, just like how a dog wags its tail. They do it to turn him into a puppy, not a person. This is a common practice in media. If the people who made this show went to school for this shit, then they were taught this. It doesn't matter if you don't think that's what they were doing. It is impossible that they wouldn't know the implications of what they were doing with this trait, and there is no other reason for them to do it. It literally serves no other purpose, because if you didn't notice, Bumblebee doesn't seem very intent on getting his voice back. Ever. It's not a motivation for him. It's an excuse to infantilize him. Otherwise, they would try and do anything with it. And then there's Miko. Fuck Miko. Miko is a sociopath who views other humans as obstacles to her fun and the Cybertronians as toys to amuse herself with. I don't give a shit that, oh no, she's from another stereotypically racist family, Asian parents who were too strict, so she has the right to treat other sentient beings like playthings and constantly endanger other people's lives because her life is so unfair. Nothing drives this home quite like, one, the fact that she gets offended when the other humans tag along with her because they're in the way of her fun with this war, and two, the episode where Bulkhead's memory is getting erased, where she, against the orders of his doctor and everyone else around him who cares, kidnaps him from treatment so she can go to a parking lot. She has no reason to expect that this could help and no plan on how to fix him. She just did it because she wanted to, and it is only by happenstance that this saves him. It was a reckless act by someone who did not see the other person involved as a sentient being and was only upset that their favorite toy was breaking. And then there's Wheeljack. Fuck Wheeljack. But you all know my reasons for hating this douchebag who doesn't know how to shut the fuck up. But yeah, that was over 2,000 words about how the characters are either agonizingly dull, aren't characters, or are blood-curdlingly infuriating. But there's so much more to this turd of a show than just that. So let's get into the animation, which people tend to really applaud with this show, and I used to as well, you know, back before I had a degree in 3D animation. Now that I do, I can see that this is not top-tier animation, putting past entries to shame. Beast Wars was a bunch of brilliant creatives working on something that they loved making with technology 10 years too early, inventing things that didn't even exist yet just to better tell the story they wanted. Prime, on the other hand, is a passionless paycheck, made by a mercenary team who didn't give half a fuck about what they were doing, just using more advanced tools than was available previously, and it's blatant. When I saw the first episode of Earthspark, my jaw dropped, because while the art style of the show is ugly as sin, the animation is divine, a thing of beauty. It is expressive and fluid and deep, so utterly creative. Everything reacts. The world is a plaything for these animators. Someone shoots a gun, and they're too low to their target, so they can't get the angle they need, just scraping the edge of their target's cover. As the leader runs across the tops of the container she's on, she imparts force into them, causing them to topple over. They get into an extended fistfight, and everything is gorgeously choreographed, all handled in large extended poses where these guys clearly had a keyframe animator as the shipping crates almost fall on them. This fight is completely unique and distinct to this location, and this location alone. This fight could only happen here. Meanwhile, in Prime, even the action is horrifically boring, because if you've seen a single fight in Prime, then you've seen every fight in Prime. It doesn't matter where the fight is set, it's the same fight every single time. The Autobots come Leroy Jenkins running into a kill box, mostly firing at targets off screen. If we're lucky, there will be one guy in their way. When they get to the dead center of the enemy formation, where they are at their most disadvantaged, they stop, the camera dramatically pans around them as they go back to back, firing at targets you can't see. Someone does slow motion martial arts on an enemy who for some reason ran into melee with them or was already there when the Autobots arrived. Continue with dramatic camera angles that give you no clear picture of what this pitched battle is like, since if we could see it properly, we'd know how bad the Autobots just screwed themselves. Rinse and repeat every single episode with maybe some added flavor like the Autobots taking cover behind a big rock, and then if the big rock takes too big an explosion, it doesn't fall on anyone or anything, it just ceases to exist. There is no substance to any of these fights, just razzle-dazzle style that's meant to wow you while not actually being something that anyone put any thought into. There is one good fight in all of Prime, and ironically it features Wheeljack, and that's the Predaking vs. Wheeljack and Ultra Magnus one. That fight is glorious, it's perfect, it's beautiful. Dare I say, it made me hate Wheeljack a little less, up until he opened his stupid mouth and ruined it. But this fight looked like they had a vision, that they had a keyframe animator, and maybe even a storyboarder. But every other fight in the show is a complete copy-paste to the point of monotony that are all the same over and over. And the few times that they aren't, like Wheeljack vs. Soundwave, they are just uninspired, giving into the same habits as everything else. The constant switch to slow-mo doesn't look cool, it just lowers the impact of the hits. Slow-mo, not slow-mo. Slow-mo, not slow-mo. Do you see how much more power it looks like Alita has because her fight runs in real time without pointless stoppages? And it's not even just the fights, it's everything about this show. It's how their transformations aren't actually designed, so they basically just explode into tornadoes of parts that reform into their robot modes. It's how their mouths are just these perfectly cut holes into their faces, like they're made out of a pie crust. It's how the lighting is so constantly flat and lifeless. This show has one trick to try and make scenes look interesting, and that's to make everything else super dark with one center light. But the whole show is already remarkably dark. Everything looks like it's lit with fluorescent bulbs, and it's got this gray filter over it. It's so tiring to look at. Everything just has this plasticity to it, so the humans don't look like humans. Instead, they look more like toys than the actual robots who are meant to sell toys. But that's a minor concern, honestly. An interesting series doesn't even need visuals. After all, books are a thing. So if the show is ugly or uninspired looking, at least it has other ways to keep us interested. Unfortunately, that's a lost fucking cause here because this show never evolves. The characters do not change, with a bare few exceptions. Starscream learns to lick Megatron's boots, Wheeljack learns to stop completely refusing to be part of a team, Ratchet learns to stop viewing humans as inferior, despite the fact that there's not really a perceptible change in his attitude after that. At best, he stops talking about it, which just means that he actually lost a character trait and became even more boring. And I guess Fowler learns that he kind of likes the Autobots, so he stops arguing with them so much. Oh, I just love how the very little character development we get actually makes these losers have even fewer interesting dynamics. Outside of that, Optimus is a vending machine that dispenses empty proverbs and sucks all of the joy out of the room for payment when he is introduced, and he's still a charisma black hole deeper and darker than the well of Allsparks he jumps into at the end. Bulkhead is a moderately jovial guy who hangs out with Miko in episode 1 and in 60. RC stays serious and cold, maybe forming a creepy sexual bond with a human teen millions of years younger than her. Bumblebee is a brick, Soundwave is a brick, Breakdown is a brick, all the way up until he dies. Even the jokes in this don't evolve. I cannot even begin to tell you how painful the "Bulkhead, I needed that" joke becomes after the 10th time it was never funny in the first place. It never changes, it never grows. Bulkhead breaks some nondescript, previously unseen item and Ratchet yells at him for it. And there are so many ways that you could take this joke. You could have him accidentally fall on the object and get blamed for it. You could establish just how needed the item is. Maybe someone's been poisoned and Ratchet's like, "It's okay, I'll use my antidote synthesizer on them and they'll be right as rain." Then he opens the case it's kept in and it's empty. There's a silence, punctuated by confused noises from Ratchet, while the camera slowly pans over to Bulkhead, who's standing like 5 feet to the right, already with the synthesizer in hand, just going, "The con's using poison really grinds my gears," and then he throws it into a wall. You could have Ratchet getting progressively angrier about it and start chasing Bulkhead around for it. You could have Bulkhead pick up a beaker and start talking about the cons. As he does so, he gets more and more heated, getting louder and angrier, but halfway through, Ratchet just yells at him, "No! No! You have broken enough of my stuff! No more, Bulkhead! I've had it! You put that down! You put it down on the table right now!" Then Bulkhead just gingerly sets it down on the table with a scared expression. He's got his hands up in the air. He's backing away from the table slowly. It's quiet for a second. Then the object rolls off the table and breaks on the ground. Bulkhead, I needed that! But no, the joke is the same every time because this series never progresses in any way. It's the same episode with the same fights and the same character dynamics, episode after episode. But at least the show has a serious tone, right? Like it's the Darkest Transformers cartoon, and therefore it's good, right? Well, one, that's just incorrect. The Darkest Transformers show is Beast Machines, and that show also sucks. But two, being dark is not a good thing. It's also not a bad thing. It's a neutral thing. You can't make a show better just by making it dark. And three, is it? Is it actually dark? This show starts with the death of Cliffjumper because it's trying to set the tone that it's dark, but who is Cliffjumper here? Did anyone cry about Cliffjumper dying? No, because he wasn't a character. You can't care about a character you've only spent 2 minutes with. You have had no time to get attached to this dude, which is why they were comfortable with killing him off in the first place, honestly. The only way anyone felt anything for this walking corpse was through transitive property. They knew the character from G1, so they felt like they knew him here. But then, who else dies? Breakdown, who was an underdeveloped bad guy. Skyquake, who was an underdeveloped bad guy with basically no character. Hardshell, who was an underdeveloped ascended background bad guy. Makeshift, who was an underdeveloped bad guy whose personality we knew literally nothing about because he pretended to be Wheeljack the whole episode. Dreadwind, who was actually a character, though a confusing one since he was an honorable warrior who also really liked incredibly honorable tactics like putting mines on the bodies of dead people. And Megatron, who I don't know about you, but I don't really consider killing off the main villain in the last minutes of the last episode dark. And he doesn't even stay dead. Meanwhile, spoilers for Beast Wars, a show that doesn't even remotely purport to be dark, who dies? Almost all of them. Out of 22 main characters in the show, 14 of them die. We also see an early hominid devoured by a snake, and a great many of them get slaughtered by the Predacons. More than half the cast in a show that does not pretend to be dark dies. And it's not just the bad guys who do either. A lot of those casualties are our heroes. When someone dies in Beast Wars, it's not a character that the other characters cared about, it's a character that you cared about. Now, I'm not saying that one show having more character deaths or more important character deaths than another makes it the preferable show. Having characters die, if done well, can be a good thing. But so can not killing them. But if Prime is going to sit here and act like it's the Dark Transformers series and then only kill off characters that mean nothing to anyone because no one knows who the fuck they are, then I'm going to call bullshit. It's not dark, it's a lie. It pretends to be dark because it's so stupid that it thinks that just being dark makes the series better. But it's not willing to make the sacrifices needed to actually be dark. Killing Cliffjumper isn't a tragedy that sets the tone for the series, it's a trick using a cardboard cutout they hope you will care about because you know the name, to try and make you think that the show has stakes, and is that oh so alluring, dark and mature. But it's not real darkness, the characters aren't really at any risk. There's a reason why the Decepticons are a horde of faceless nobodies in this show. In Beast Wars, if you shot a Predacon, that's Pterosaur or Waspinator. But this show wanted to seem like it had consequences, so instead of it being Tarantulas who get shot, it's nobody. And they stay down, at least as far as you know, and there's millions of them. And they all look exactly the same, so that one's probably dead. Which brings me to another point about this awful show. The plot guns here are insane. Weaponry is only as deadly in this series as the scene needs it to be. The Autobots can wind up in the center of 100 Vehicons who are all shooting at them at once, and it doesn't matter that they should end up shredded like cheese. If the scene wants them to win, then the Vehicons have worse aim than stormtroopers, and the Autobots will never get hit. Or if they do, it's barely an inconvenience. Sometimes shots cause massive injury. Sometimes shots do basically nothing. There are no rules in any of these fights. You cannot gauge how it's going because the weapons and units are only ever as capable as the writer demands. Every fight is an ass pull, and as a result, every fight is unsatisfying. There's never any consequences to any of the combat. And if there could be, then the characters are too stupid to capitalize on it. There's that one time where Starscream breaks into the Autobots' base while in a temporary super speed boost, and he thinks about killing the Autobots, but instead he decides against it because he wants to loot the place first. Hey, dumbass! Kill them all, then loot the place at your leisure. They can't stop you if they're dead, and you won't even need to bother looting them if they are, because killing them means you won the war! But I'm starting to ramble. This show is so boring, the episodes just run together, and I had to punish myself to make this review by rewatching a good chunk of the show. Yet I still can't describe half of it because it's all so generic the show just blends together in the worst way possible. The characters all have a reasonable number of character traits, they aren't two-dimensional by any stretch of the definition, but they are all played so flat they still end up like cardboard cutouts. The story is utterly inconsequential. I challenge any of you to tell me what the majority of the show is actually about. You can give a recap of Beast Wars seasons that tell people the goal of each one. Season 1 is the war over Energon and trying to get home. 2 is about about gaining control over alien weapons and the fate of the future, and 3 is all about preventing Megatron from changing the past. But you can't do that with this show. What's Season 1 about? Stuff. What's Season 2 about? Stuff. Season 3 is about stopping the Decepticon invasion of Earth and finding the Predacon corpses, but that comes far too late. And I know it's not fair to keep comparing this series to the best written show in the franchise, but this is the continuity that people keep thinking they can put on a pedestal next to Beast Wars. The action is repetitive to the point of being boring, but it can't be predictable because it does whatever it wants. The tone of the show is pretending to be dark, but it's about as dark in content as a blank sheet of paper and about as interesting as 1/2. The human characters are ball cancer, and the show is too fucking long. It's almost twice as long as Beast Wars, but it's got half the plot. It just drones on and on forever while not saying anything. And then the end of Season 2 and the 3rd season happen, and for 20 beautiful episodes, the show actually gets good. The second they introduce Smokescreen, it's just like, holy shit, a character who actually acts like they want to be here, who has a real personality, operating at a greater than 5 out of 10? Sure, he's clearly supposed to be Hot Rod just with Smokescreen's name, but I'll take this. And holy shit, they introduced Ultra Magnus, and despite being stoic, he actually has a personality, and he's awesome. He's so fucking angry all the time, I love it. Also, Dreadwind is the one other interesting Decepticon. And they introduced real stakes as the Decepticons start a for-real invasion of Earth with a more unified front. And I feel like people might finally actually die. And the fights start having some flair and style too, where it manages to look cool as shit and people use clever powers in interesting ways. Where was this show the entire fucking time up until now? Seriously, if you just start at New Recruit, the show is actually decent and fun and such a reprieve from the boredom that came before. What happened? How did a show this torturously boring actually get pretty damn good in its final act? It took way too long to get there. Just skip the first 40 episodes and you will be happier than me. But I can't in good conscience give this show anything better than a D. It is a badly written, boringly acted, depressingly animated series that the people making clearly had no love for. And if they did love it, then it's even sadder. And I just don't know what changed because the creatives behind the show seem like the exact ones it always had for its whole run. Though to be fair, it was apparently just a giant revolving door because they had like 20 writers and directors. If we are just judging New Recruit and onwards, I'll give the show a B. But this is one of the Transformers properties I have the absolute greatest interest in never watching again. My time would be more enjoyed scrubbing dishes. The show's reputation in the fandom is undeserved, and is only held in such high regard because it was many people's first Transformers series. Also, people really want to bang RC for some reason. I feel like I could have made a better video on this subject, but after wanting to make this for so many years, I just had too many competing ideas fighting for dominance, and it might have ended up a little messy. Also, I might not have covered everything I wanted to because I just can't keep what I wanted to talk about straight in my head. But that's not half what I have to say, but it's enough what I have to say. And I know you know what everyone else tells you to do at the end of these videos. So if you liked what you saw here, please do that. And if you'd like to take it a step further, then please share this video with any friend you think may be interested. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me waste your time.